Welcome back to another edition of Where's a Teaspoon? Today we're chatting with Christine Duffy. Christine works as an advanced clinical practitioner here at DCHS. She's also a Queen's nurse, the former chair of our Armed Forces Network, the new chair of our Embrace Network, and a serving reservist. And today she's going to share a little bit of her story.
Hi, Emma. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you today.
I'm really looking forward to our chat. We'll start at the beginning, Christine. So you grew up in Kenya, which is where you also completed your nurse training. Can you tell us a little bit about that upbringing and why you wanted to become a nurse?
Yeah, so as you said, I was born in Kenya, educated in Kenya, did my nurse training in Kenya. Although I've been out of the country for well over, how many years? Over 30 years. I still have fond memories of Kenya. I still visit Kenya. It was a very different upbringing to the ones my children have had here in the UK.
How is it different?
It's just the difference in cultures, and it's where everything was just so carefree. Being able to play with other children in the fields. We didn't have, we didn't live near a big city, so we lived in the village. I remember visiting my grandma and running around with her chicken and goats and everything.
Wow.
But that was sort of a really exciting side. But I also, the other part that I remember fondly, but also with reflecting on what has made me, was growing up in really poor surroundings. And so we did spend time in the city, but not in the best parts of the city. We spent about 3 years of my life, especially around the teenage life, in one of the slums in Nairobi. Challenging, but character building. Growing up there as a teenager with all the challenges around there. But that mix, especially growing up in the village, where everything was just there and you didn't have to worry about what was happening tomorrow or what would happen tomorrow. You didn't have to worry about what other kids were thinking or what other kids were doing, because you were all the same. So the kind of peer pressures we have today weren't there, because you all shared the same suffering, and you made your own entertainment, you made your own fun.
Was it a happy childhood?
I think it was a happy childhood. Some might look at it as sad or disadvantaged, but we didn't think of that at all. We were happy. We had food, not all the time, but we had food. We weren't malnourished. We weren't skinny like the images people show on TV. And I think, going back to what I was saying earlier, the inspiration for what I am today and what has brought me to where I am today was looking at the people that I envied, that I thought were way up there, and my aspiration was to get up there with them and not remain in the circumstances that I was in. And that kept driving me, especially in academics, working hard at school and paying more attention, and just having that dream of one day becoming something. And in a roundabout way, nursing was something that came to me because I just want one role model. A distant relative was a nurse, and I really liked how she talked about her job, how she liked her work. I liked her uniform. In those days, I used to wear white, really pretty white dresses and a nice frilly hat. We don't wear those anymore. So, and that was the only thing I knew. I didn't know any people that were lawyers or doctors or any other careers, occupations, and those were things that were possibly unachievable. But just knowing somebody that was doing something and had achieved, and she was from my village, that was my aspiration.
It's interesting, isn't it, how seeing that person makes it feel achievable for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's that role modeling, isn't it? Because if you don't have a role model, if you don't have somebody or something to look up to, you don't really have direction. And that is true today, because that is how children, as they grow, they start to identify what they want to be in the future, because they see their heroes, their role models doing all these exciting things or been doing these useful things, and they say, I want to be like that person. And that's it can be a big driver.
So you went on to train as a nurse, and is it right, your first role was as a refugee health nurse? Is that right? Or quite early on in your career, I think.
Yes. So I went on to I finished high school, got the best grades in my school, but I couldn't go to university at the time because I couldn't afford to pay for my parents couldn't afford to pay for my university fees. I could have gone and done anything that I wanted because I had top grades. But I had the option to do nursing. So I went and enrolled in a nursing college and did the nursing diploma. And while I was studying as a nurse, I got involved with the Kenya Red Cross as a youth volunteer. So I became the youth leader. And through that, when I finished my nursing, I went to the chairman of the Red Cross Society and asked if I could volunteer at the refugee camp in Mombasa. So there was a refugee camp for Somalis refugees that had started coming into the country in 1992. I qualified in end of 93, and he said, "Yeah, I'll take you to the I'll take you to the company and see if you can do some work there, if you can volunteer." So I started as a volunteer, and after a few months, he said, "Oh, why don't you come work for us and get paid instead of being a volunteer?" So that's when I left my job in the government hospital. That was about 3 months after I qualified as a nurse. So I was still very junior. The only experience I had was obviously as a trainee nurse and 3 months post qualification. So that was quite exciting, but also challenging, because the training in Kenya, and I think it is still the same today as a nurse, you train hands-on. So you are in the clinical setting most of the time. You go back to college or to uni. Now it's all degree training now, and you do some work in class, you go back and you're on the rota like everybody else, and you work. You are in the numbers, you are a staff member. By the time you're in your third year, you are running the wards. The nurse in charge will go off and do other things, and you're in charge of that ward. So I qualified, and the day after I qualified, I was posted onto the ward where I was a final year student nurse, and I was in charge of that ward from day one.
What a responsibility.
It's a big responsibility. So I went on to work in this refugee camp, and like I say, really challenging. Got experience doing different things. The
What's
one thing I remember there, the most challenging, we had an outbreak of cholera.
Oh my
And
goodness.
I ended up being put in charge of the cholera ward because nobody else wanted to do it. So yeah, just some of the challenges of working in an environment like that.
It must have been, you must have seen some very traumatic things in that time, and you were very young to handle that. I mean, it's what a baptism of fire, even from your hospital work, that responsibility, but then in something like a refugee camp. How did that affect you and shape you?
Um, I think that's made me grow as a nurse from being a very junior nurse. It was very challenging. It was a big eye opener because a lot of things that I took for granted, I realized that I couldn't just take for granted because you see the women coming with their children, and they don't have food. So when I'm coming from my village and thinking we were poor, and sometimes we didn't have food, but you get to this other side and you realize actually it wasn't that bad, because at the end of the day you still have your home, you still have your family, you still have your community, but these are people who've been dislocated. They're in a completely different country, they speak a different language, and they cannot access the for example, the health system. So we were their health system, as the Red Cross nurses, we were their health system. I mean, when you think about women, we had a maternity unit, and when I talk about a maternity unit, it's not what you get from a hospital. It's a tent, and in those tents you don't have beds, so they are sleeping on mats on the floor, and they're giving birth on those mats. Yeah, absolutely. But it made me it hardened my resolve in terms of wanting to help more, because from there I went on to work in a refugee camp in Tanzania for another 9 months, and then I spent 2 years working in a refugee camp in the DRC, which was then Zaire, in a camp of 300,000 refugees from Rwanda. That was after the Rwanda genocide. Again, I was young, and
How old were you at this point, Christine?
I was in my early 20s.
Yeah.
And by today's standards, still very junior nurse, because by the time I went to Rwanda, I was only 2 years qualified, and I was running this community health project covering 300,000 refugees, and our project had it had a health clinic. We were the ones providing maternity services, antenatal and postnatal, mother and baby clinics, therapeutic feedings, all the nutritional programs, just to feed the children, prevent malnutrition, working very closely with other agencies, the UN, MSF, the British Red Cross were there, the British Army were there. And that's how I wonder whether that's how I started thinking about the British Army. Maybe not, because at the time I hadn't even it didn't ever crossed my mind that I would one day be in the UK. So that was I think that has had a bigger impact for me than even the time I spent in the refugee camp in Mombasa. And it made me reflect about myself and my as a professional, because we worked with local nurses and doctors who had lost everything. They did not have anything to prove who they were, to prove that they were nurses or doctors. And it's only by working with them and seeing them work, you realize these are actually highly qualified, highly experienced people. But it could be me. If something like that happened in my country, you wake up one day, you go to work, and you instead of going home, you're running for your life, crossing the border into another country with nothing except the clothes on your back, with your identity completely lost. So that was a big thing for me, and it's one of those things you have to try and separate the emotions from, as okay, I've got a job to do, I've got responsibility for these people, I've got to do the best I can with the limited resources that I've got.
Otherwise, that grief would just overtake you. It's such a lot to
absolutely
be working in.
Because you form relationships, especially when you're there for we were there for 2 years. These people become your family in a way, because you're there for 3 months at a time, then you go home to your own family for 2 weeks and then come back, and they become your family. And if something happens to them, it really breaks your heart, because you want to help them but you can't. You want to take them home with you but you can't because you just can't take everyone home with you.
Did you keep in touch with anybody that you met there, Christine? Did you continue any, you've described them as being like family, and I imagine when you are that close, it is hard to let go.
And unfortunately not, because the circumstances changed suddenly and we had to be evacuated from the location by the United Nations. I don't know if you remember. So it was Zaire, and at the time, that's when there was a coup, and there was an attack on the camp, and there was infighting. They wanted to get rid of the refugees, and all the experts that were working in the refugee camps, because we were all under the UN, we had to be evacuated out of the country for our own safety and security. And it just happened overnight. We couldn't get out through the airports because it was closed. We had to stay in the bunkers, in a UN safe house, and wait to be taken out by convoy. It felt like being in a battleground, because we really had to hide because there was gunfire outside our accommodation, and we couldn't leave until the UN negotiated a way out for us.
How you must have been terrified. That is terrifying. That's not what you signed up for at all.
No, it's not what you sign up for. But when I sit here and think about the refugee agencies that go out to Ukraine, for example, or now to Gaza, and all these places where there's warring facts going on, and I clearly remember the time there and think, oh my God, they are really brave, because they are going there. They are not military. They are not armed, and it was peaceful when we went, because the fighting had stopped. We were just looking after the refugees, and then suddenly, before you know it, you're in the middle of a war zone, and what do? You just have to get out. So I don't know. I often think about all those people that I worked with. I always wonder what happened to them. I don't know. All I can pray is that most of them survived, maybe moved to different camps, maybe found each other and they are still somewhere safe. But yeah, often I will think about them and wonder what happened.
I was going to just ask, do you often, it sounds like it's such a harrowing experience. Do you compartmentalize that and put it away, or does it live with you? Do you think of those times often?
I think it's things, it's part of your life you cannot really walk away from. You have to think about it. But I usually think about it positively, because in different ways. So I think about the experience that I gained through working there, through just the cultural understanding of the people, because they were all different cultures, thinking about the good times, thinking about the things I learned, because I was taught French by one of the refugees. So he became my interpreter and became my French tutor.
Yeah.
And yeah, just little things that you learn, and you makes you appreciate life. And I suppose it just makes me appreciate people more, because you you see somebody, but you don't know what they've left behind, or what they were, or what they've gone through. So it just makes you that bit more sensitive and appreciative of life, and appreciative of what you have, the little things that you have that we take for granted.
Yeah. I love that positive framing of such an experience, Christine. I wonder if you can tell us then what brought you to the UK?
So nothing really specifically. I think it's all part of my adventure. So just to go back. So when I left the refugee camp, I ended up in South Africa. And because I've always had this ambition and thinking, I need to explore the world. I'd like to work in another country. And I wanted to come to the UK at the time, because I felt, or I thought, the nursing identity or was familiar with the nurse training that I had gone through at the time. Was actually, my training was based on the UK system, but it's changed now. It's completely different. No relevance at all with how the training is run. So that was one of the things. I'd enjoy the sense of adventure by going from Kenya to Tanzania to Rwanda to Zaire. And I just wanted to also do something different, something bigger for myself. So I went to South Africa first. And I was in South Africa for 7 years before I came to the UK.
How many years were you in South Africa?
I was in South Africa for 7 years.
7 years, yeah.
7 years, yes. Again, more cultural education, very different to Kenya, also very different to the UK. And I think that going from Kenya to South Africa to the UK was probably in hindsight, a good move, because I think it eased my transition from Kenya to the UK.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because of that cultural difference. Because going to South Africa, it's very diverse, it's very mixed. The weather is it's tropical, so it's slightly different to Kenya, which is always equatorial. So a little bit of cold, a little bit of hot. So by the time I got here, I was getting used to a bit of cold weather, although the cold weather in South Africa is like early autumn here, so
Yeah.
can't be compared to the winter here. Yeah, so it was nursing that brought me here to advance my nursing and build on what I had continued to develop by through going to South Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously you have stayed. What made you stay in the UK? Do you love it here? Does it feel like home?
I do. It feels like home. And actually, somebody asked me that question. A Kenyan British colleague, as in they are British, but they lived in Kenya all their lives, and we were having this chat, and we were saying, "So, where do you consider home?" So my friend considers Kenya home because although they are British born and they are white British, they've lived in Kenya all their lives. And they
Yeah.
said, actually, that's really interesting because I feel home here in the UK. So when I talk about home, this is what I consider as home because I'm settled, my children are here, my husband is here. I have family in Kenya, but
Mm.
I have got to a point where I don't think I could fit in the Kenyan healthcare system. It's
Okay.
too chaotic for me. Especially the thought of going into a government office in Kenya just freaks me out. The politics. I just,
Mm.
I feel comfortable here.
Yeah.
But I love going to Kenya. I love
Yeah.
spending time in Kenya with family because again, it's a different culture. It's more, um, um, it's more carefree and yeah, you can go out and have parties. You don't have to book to house. You just turn up and or they
Yeah.
just turn up and you don't have to plan things weeks ahead
Yeah.
to meet up with friends. And yeah, I love the parties. We have big parties in Kenya because we have big families.
Mhm.
Yeah, so yeah, I in terms of ways home for me, half here, half in Kenya. I feel more comfortable here.
So just stepping away from the nursing part of your life for a moment, outside of your work in the NHS, you serve as an army nursing officer. When did you join the reserves and why?
So I joined the reserves in 2009, which is 15 years now, actually. It's a long time. Okay. Yeah, I was 39
Okay.
and I needed to do something. I just felt I needed to do something different. I think
Mhm.
I was reaching that point. Well, it's not yet midlife, 39. People say 45 or going into 50 is the midlife, but I think I got my midlife really early and I just felt a bit, oh, life is getting boring. I want to do something different, something
Mhm.
exciting. And also, um, I had a colleague who was a reservist, and she was always talking about all these things they do and where they go and everything. And then remembering my time in the refugee camps and all that connection, I thought, actually, I might just have an opportunity to do something again, like I did when I worked in the refugee camps. And that's why I joined up. Do something different. And I have I have no regrets. It's been absolutely amazing. The training and finishing and getting my um, officer medal and passing out at Sandhurst was the biggest achievement. I think so far. I've got quite a few achievements. I think that was by far the proudest moment of my life. Just
Yeah.
standing there with my fellow officers on parade in our shiny brown uniform and boots
Mm.
and just feeling so proud. And the only
What an
thing I was thinking
achievement.
at the time was, I wish my mom could be here to see me, but she was in
Oh,
Kenya at the
mm.
time. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's usually everybody's proudest moment.
And so after that, what kind of time commitment was there from you? What does it in your day-to-day life and throughout the course of a year, what kind of commitment do you have to make?
So the time commitments is 27 days a year.
Yeah.
It may sound like not a lot, but it is a lot when you have a full-time job and a family, because
Yes.
or you have to fit in all that in your work, fit your family around it, or fit it around your family holidays. And the 27 days include 2 weeks annual camp every year,
Yeah.
which can be in the most boring places like Salisbury Plains, or the most exciting place I've been was Chicago.
Oh, very nice.
And
Yeah.
we've been to Gibraltar on camp. We've been to Cyprus on camp. There's usually 2 weeks, and then the rest is usually weekends, as in Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, and once every 2 weeks training on a Tuesday night.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, 2 hours on a Tuesday night, and that makes up the 27 days. You can do more, but that's the minimum you have to do,
Yeah.
to get your certificate of efficiency. That's what it's called.
Yeah.
That's, yeah. You can do, some people get to do much more, especially if you have added responsibilities. For example, because I am now in my role, I am the officer in command of my squadron. I have to do an extra day a week just doing my command and staff jobs, because I have to do reports for my officers and soldiers in the squadron, attend meetings, training for them. You end up with all those added responsibilities.
Yeah. You recently returned from an operational tour of duty in the Middle East. Can you tell us a bit about that experience?
Yeah, that was my first tour of duty,
How
and
long did it go for?
it was the actual deployment was 3.5 months. The deployment or the mobilization was 8 months. So how it works is we got mobilized in or got the mobilization notice in beginning of 23. It was told that you are mobilized from the 6th of March, and it's for up to a year. So from the 6th of March, I was no longer an employee of DCHS. I was a full-time employee of the Army, so become a full-time Army officer. So I had to take time away from DCHS, and we did pre-deployment training. So it was 3 months of pre-deployment training, just to bridge any gaps in terms of the skills that are required on the ground, things that we don't do every day. So we got to catch up on that. Went out in June and came back in end of September. And then you have leave. The leave was 6 weeks, and then back to work.
So what
Yeah.
kind of things were you doing out there?
So I was part of a light surgical group. My role there was I went in my Army role as a critical care nurse, very different to my role in the NHS, but I had to keep up the skills that I had when I first joined the Army. And really just in support of troops that were on operations there. I cannot go into the details of exactly what we did or where we were, because it's operational security issues, but in support of a light surgical group.
Yeah.
So we're being ready to treat any casualties that came our way from either our troops, our British Army troops, or any other troops from other allied armies.
Was it, appreciating you can't go into details here, but was it a challenging experience for you?
It was challenging, not so much clinically, but operationally and just the location, because and the routine, because the routine is completely different. You are basically on duty 24/7. So you don't have a day off to go shopping or to go anywhere. It's hot. Temperatures were as high as 49 degrees. I think it went up to 50 on one occasion. Very small team, so it really challenges your small team dynamics, and which is always really difficult because everybody copes in different ways when they are removed from their usual environment or from their routine.
Yeah.
And they're just getting used to working with this team that has been put together, because I didn't know or ever seen any of the people I went out with, because they're not from my unit. So we all met for the first time during pre-deployment training. So it's learning to look after yourself, to look after your colleagues, and maintain that team cohesion, while at the same time not being able to communicate with your family as much as you would like to. Again, because of operational security, we um, we I couldn't even have my running watch because it has Bluetooth. So anything with Bluetooth, you're not supposed to have. So the little things that you're used to, and you think, oh, I need to go for a run, I've got to take my watch, I've got to take my phone. We didn't have any of that. So I think those are just it's more the mental challenges, your mental resilience more than anything else.
Yeah. And how has it been away from your family for that period of time? How did you cope and how did they cope?
It was hard. I think not being able to speak to them every day or update them. I think it was probably harder for them because they didn't know exactly where I was. Because all I could tell them was, I'm in this region, rather than I am in this place. And you know how people will have their own theories, and my mother-in-law, she's really fantastic at theorizing and thinking, I'm sure she's in such a place. You know what's happening in the world, I'm sure that is where they are. And I say, well, if that is what you think. So I think they were more worried than I was, because like I said, not knowing where we are and thinking about what's happening in the world, and just thinking about the worst and imagining the worst. But for me, it was just not being able to tell them where I was and what I was doing. That was the hardest thing. And sometimes, if when I it, when before I went, every time I was talking to my husband, I was almost tempted sometimes to say, "Can I tell you, and you promise never, ever, until you die, say anything?" And I say, actually, and I can't tell him that. If he doesn't know, he can't say anything. But if he knows, who knows when you'll be tempted to say something.
I'm
But yeah,
wondering, your experiences as a reservist, how have they impacted you as a person? And have they also impacted you in your career back in the NHS?
oh, massively. I think if I go back to impacted on me as a person, I remember when I first joined the army, I thought I was fit, but my first fitness test nearly killed me.
Yeah.
It seriously, it nearly killed me. And I thought, oh, is that how unfit I am? And so that motivated me to get fitter. And
Yeah.
since then, I've found that fitness has become part of my daily routine. So I don't do it for the army. I don't do it for any. Well, then I used to do it to pass my fitness test and everything.
Mm.
But then, as I started to get more mature, actually I'm not doing it for the army. I'm doing it for myself, for my general health and well-being. And once I accepted that, it became easier. And so
Yeah.
I don't have to make any extra effort. And I can just wake up today, go do my fitness test, and I will pass without having to do any advanced training for it, because it's
Mm.
just part of my daily routine.
Yeah.
So it's given me that discipline to look after myself, look after my health. And the other thing it's given me, which has translated to my team in the NHS, is this team ethos, where when we work in the army as a team, we look after each other. So we are committed to our teams, and you know that if you fail, the whole team fails. So everybody, or if you fail, somebody dies. Basically,
Mm.
that's that. Because
Mm.
if for example, if you're a soldier and you're not disciplined enough to look after your weapon, and you cannot use it to um, defend yourself or protect your patient, because as a nurse, that is the only time I would ever use a weapon, self-defense and my patient's defense. If I'm not disciplined enough to look after my kit, I I could die, my colleague could die, my patient could die. Likewise, in the NHS, it's exactly the same. If I don't look after the kit that I'm given by the NHS to do my job, my patient could die.
Mm.
And then that's that knock-on effect on the team. If I don't turn up when I'm supposed to turn up, then the team cannot be effective because I am not there.
Yeah.
If I do not respect the people that I'm working with, then there's no team dynamics. And if there's no team dynamics, the team cannot be a productive and effective team. In the army, we call it, it affects operational effectiveness. And for us, operational effectiveness is what keeps us alive.
Mm.
And in the NHS, operational effectiveness is what keeps our patients alive.
Yeah.
So that, I think for me, that's the biggest thing. Just that team ethos, respect for each other, and recognizing people's strengths and abilities, because within a team we all have different skills, we all have different experiences, and no matter what rank I am, my most junior soldier might be the expert in a certain subject. So I say that I'm the officer in command of my squadron. I see myself as not the person that's there to tell people what to do, but to identify who can do what. And
Yeah.
I need to know their strengths. I need to harness those strengths and empower them and make them feel appreciated, because if people feel appreciated, they take pride in what they do.
Mm.
And if people take pride in what they do, they are ultimately more productive. And that is something we don't do very well in the NHS. That's something I try to do within my teams, and I hope I do well. I don't know. My the feedback I get from my team is that I'm a good team player. And I hope that translates to how I work with my patients as well. Yeah. So yeah, and so it's things like that that really cross between the skills you learn from the army and the skills that you learn from the NHS, and how each can benefit you as an individual in whichever setting.
Yeah. Christine, it has been absolutely fascinating to hear a little bit about your experiences. Thank you so much for making the time in that incredibly busy life of yours to talk to us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Emma.
Thank you.